Hi guys, welcome back to my read along channel. We're gonna read some more of Roald Dahl the Twits. This is all Roald Dahl's own work. I'm just reading it for entertainment and pleasure. We are going to read the next chapter, which is called The Wormy Spaghetti. Interesting. And we're on page 16 if you're reading my copy. So without further ado, let's get going. The Wormy Spaghetti. The next day, to pay Mr. Twit back for the frog trick, Mrs. Twit sneaked out into the garden and dug up some worms. She chose big, long ones and put them in a tin and carried the tin back to the house under her apron. At 1 o'clock, she cooked spaghetti for lunch and she mixed the worms in with the plate of spaghetti, but only on her husband's plate. The worms didn't show because everything was covered with tomato sauce and sprinkled with cheese. Hey, my spaghetti's moving, cried Mr. Twit, poking around in it with his fork. It's a new kind, Mrs. Twit said, taking a mouthful from her own plate, which of course had no worms. It's called squiggly spaghetti. It's delicious. Eat it up while it's nice and hot. Mr. Twit started eating, twisting the long tomato-covered strings around his fork and shoveling them into his mouth. Soon there was tomato sauce all over his hairy chin. It's not as good as the ordinary kind, he said, talking with his mouth full. It's so squishy. I find it very tasty, Mrs. Twit said. She was watching him from the other end of the table. It gave her great pleasure to watch him eating worms. I find it rather bitter, Mr. Twit said. It's got a distinctly bitter flavour. Buy the other kind next time. Mrs. Twit waited until Mr. Twit had eaten the whole plateful. Then she said, You want to know why your spaghetti was squishy? Mr. Twit wiped his tomato sauce away from his beard with a corner of the tablecloth. Why? He said. And why it had a nasty bitter taste? Why? He said. Because it was worms, cried Mrs. Twit, clapping her hands and stamping her feet on the floor and rocking with a horrible laughter. The funny walking stick. Next chapter. To pay Mrs. Twit back for the worms in his spaghetti, Mr. Twit thought up a really clever, nasty trick. One night, when the old woman was asleep, he crept out of the bed and took her walking stick down the stairs to his work shed. There he stuck a tiny round piece of wood, no thicker than a penny, onto the bottom of the stick. This made the stick longer, but the difference was so small the next morning Mrs. Twit didn't notice it. The following night Mr. Twit stuck on another tiny bit of wood. Every night he crept downstairs and added an extra tiny thickness of wood to the end of the walking stick. He did it very neatly so that the extra bits looked like a part of the old stick. Gradually, but also gradually, Mrs. Twit's walking stick was getting longer and longer. Now, when something is growing very slowly, it is almost impossible to notice it happening. You yourself, for example, are actually growing taller every day that goes by, but you wouldn't think it, would you? It's happening so slowly you can't even notice it from one week to the next. It was the same with Mrs. Twit's walking stick. It was all so slow and gradual that she didn't notice how long it was getting, even when it was halfway up to her shoulder. That stick's too long for you, Mrs. Twit said to her one day. Why, so it is, Mrs. Twit said, looking at the stick. I've had a feeling there was something wrong, but I couldn't for the life of me think what it was. There's something wrong, all right, Mr. Twit said, beginning to enjoy himself. What can have happened? Mrs. Twit said, staring at her old walking stick. It must suddenly have grown longer. Don't be a fool, Mr. Twit said. How can a walking stick possibly grow longer? It's made of dead wood, isn't it? Dead wood can't grow. Then what on earth has happened? Cried Mrs. Twit. It's not the stick, it's you, said Mr. Twit, grinning horribly. It's you that's getting shorter. I've been noticing it for some time now. That's not true, cried Mrs. Twit. You're shrinking, woman, said Mr. Twit. It's not possible. Oh, yes, it jolly well is, said Mr. Twit. You're shrinking fast. You're shrinking dangerously fast. Why, you must have shrunk at least a foot in the last few days. Never, she cried. Of course you have. Take a look at your stick, you old goat, and see how much you've shrunk in comparison. You've got the shrinks, that's what you've got. You've got the dreaded shrinks. Mrs. Twit began to feel so trembly she had to sit down. Next chapter. Mrs. Twit Has the Shrinks. As soon as Mrs. Twit sat down, Mr. Twit pointed at her and shouted, There you are! You're sitting in your old chair and you've shrunk so much your feet aren't even touching the ground. Mrs. Twit looked down at her feet, and by golly the man was right. Her feet were not touching the ground. Mr. Twit, you see, had just been as clever with the chair as he'd been with the walking stick. Every night, when he had gone downstairs and stuck a little bit extra onto the stick, he had done the same to the four legs of Mrs. Twit's chair. "Just look at you sitting there in the same old chair," he cried, "and you've shrunk so much your feet are dangling in the air." Mrs. Twit went white with fear. "You've got the shrinks," cried Mr. Twit, pointing his finger at her like a pistol. "You've got them badly. You've got the most terrible case of shrinks I've ever seen." Mrs. Twit became so frightened she began to dribble, but Mr. Twit, still remembering the worms with his spaghetti, didn't feel sorry for her at all. "I suppose you know what happens to you when you get the shrinks," he said. "What?" gasped Mrs. Twit. "What happens?" "Your head shrinks into your neck, and your neck shrinks into your body, and your body shrinks into your legs, and your legs shrink into your feet, and in the end there's nothing left except a pair of shoes and a bundle of old clothes." "I can't bear it," cried Mrs. Twit. "It's a terrible disease," said Mr. Twit. "The worst in the world." "How long have I got?" cried Mrs. Twit. "How long before I finish up as a bundle of old clothes and a pair of shoes?" Mr. Twit put on a very solemn face. "At the rate you're going," he said, shaking his head sadly, "I'd say not more than 10 or 11 days." "But isn't there anything we can do?" cried Mrs. Twit. "There's only one cure for the shrinks," said Mr. Twit. "Tell me," she cried. "Oh, tell me quickly." "We'll have to hurry," said Mr. Twit. "I'm ready. I'll hurry. I'll do anything you say," cried Mrs. Twit. "You won't last long if you don't," said Mr. Twit, giving her another grisly grin. "What is it I must do?" cried Mrs. Twit, clutching her cheeks. "You've got to be stretched," said Mr. Twit. Next chapter. Mrs. Twit gets a stretching. Mr. Twit led Mrs. Twit outdoors, where he had everything ready for the great stretching. He had 100 balloons and lots of string. He had a gas cylinder for filling the balloons. He had fixed an iron ring into the ground. "Stand here," he said, pointing to the iron ring. He then tied Mrs. Twit's ankles to the iron ring. When that was done, he began filling the balloons with gas. Each balloon was on a long string, and when it was filled with gas, it pulled on its string, trying to go up and up. Mr. Twit tied the ends of the strings to the top of the half of Mrs. Twit's body. Some he tied round her neck, some under her arms, and some to her wrists, and some even to her hair. Soon there was 50 coloured balloons floating in the air above Mrs. Twit's head. "Can you feel them stretching you?" asked Mr. Twit. I can," cried Mrs. Twit. "They're stretching me like mad." He put on another 10 balloons. The upward pull became very strong. Mrs. Twit was quite helpless now, with her feet tied to the ground and her arms pulled upwards by the balloons. She was unable to move. She was a prisoner, and Mr. Twit had intended to go away and leave her like that for a couple of days and nights to teach her a lesson. In fact, he was just about to leave when Mrs. Twit opened her big mouth and said something silly. "Are you sure my feet are tied properly to the ground?" he gasped. "If those strings around my ankles break, it'll be a goodbye for me." And that's what gave Mr. Twit his second nasty idea. Next chapter. Mrs. Twit goes ballooning up. "There's enough to pull here to take me to the moon," Mrs. Twit cried out. "To take you to the moon!" exclaimed Mr. Twit. "What a ghastly thought! We wouldn't want anything like that to happen. Oh dear me, no. We most certainly wouldn't," cried Mrs. Twit. "Put some more string around my ankles quickly. I want to feel absolutely safe." "Very well, my angel," said Mr. Twit, and with a ghoulish grin on his lips, he knelt down at her feet. He took a knife from his pocket, and with the one quick slash, he cut through the strings holding Mrs. Twit's ankles to the iron ring. She went up like a rocket. "Help!" she screamed. "Save me!" But there was no saving her now. In a few seconds she was high up in the blue sky and climbing fast. Mr. Twit stood below, looking up. "What a pretty sight," he said to himself. "How lovely all those balloons look in the sky. And what marvellous bit of luck for me. At last the old hag is lost and gone forever." Next chapter. Mrs. Twit comes ballooning down. Mrs. Twit may have been ugly and she may have been beastly, but she was not stupid. High up there in the sky she had a bright idea. "If I can get rid of some of these balloons," she said to herself, "I will stop going up and start to come down." She began biting through the strings that held the balloons to her wrists and arms and neck and hair. Each time she bit through the string, and let the balloon float away. The upward pull got less and her rate of climb slowed down. When she'd bitten through the 20 strings, she stopped going up altogether. She stayed still in the air. She bit through one more string. Very, very slowly. She began to float downwards. It was a calm day. There was no wind at all, and because of this, Mrs. Twit had gone absolutely straight up. She now began to come absolutely straight down. She floated gently down. Mrs. Twit's petticoat billowed out like a parachute, showing her long knickers. It was a grand sight on a glorious day, and thousands of birds came flying in from miles around to stare at this extraordinary old woman in the sky. Next chapter, Mr. Twit gets a horrid shock. Mr. Twit, who thought he had seen his ugly wife for the last time, was sitting in the garden celebrating with a mug of beer. Silently, Mrs. Twit came floating down. When she was about the height of the house above Mr. Twit, she suddenly called out at the top of her voice, "Here I come, you grisly old grunion, you rotten old turnip, you filthy old frumpet!" Mr. Twit jumped as though he had been stung by a giant wasp. He dropped his beer. He looked up. He gawked. He gasped. He gurgled. A few choking sounds came out of his mouth. "Ah!" he said. "Ah! Ouch! I'll get you for this!" shouted Mrs. Twit. She was floating down right on top of him, and she was purple with rage, and slashing the air out of with her long walking stick, which she had somehow managed to hang on to all the time. "I'll swish you to a swazzle!" she shouted. "I'll swash you to a swizzle! I'll gnash you to a nozzle! I'll nosh you to a nazzle!" And before Mr. Twit had time to run away, this bundle of balloons and petticoats and fiery fury landed right on top of him, lashing out with the stick and cracking him all over his body. Next chapter, The House, the Tree, and the Monkey Cage. But that's enough of that. We can't go on forever watching these two disgusting people doing disgusting things to each other. We must get ahead with the story. Here is a picture of Mr. and Mrs. Twit's house and garden. Some house. It looks like a prison, and not a window anywhere. And there is a picture, but I'm sorry, you can't see it. "Who wants windows?" Mr. Twit had said when they were building it. "Who wants every Tom, Dick, and Harry peeping in to see what you're doing?" It didn't occur to Mr. Twit that the windows were meant mainly for looking out of, not for looking into. "And what do you think of that ghastly garden?" Mrs. Twit was the gardener. She was very good at growing thistles and stinging nettles. "I always grow plenty of spiky thistles and plenty of stinging nettles," she used to say. "They keep out nasty, nosy little children." Near the house you can see Mr. Twit's work shed. To one side there is the big dead tree. It never has any leaves on it because it's dead. And not far from the tree you can see the monkey cage. There are 4 monkeys in it. They belong to Mr. Twit. You'll hear about them later. Next chapter, Hugtight Sticky Glue. Once a week, on Wednesdays, the Twits had bird pie for supper. Mr. Twit caught the birds and Mrs. Twit cooked them. Mr. Twit was good at catching birds. On the day before bird pie, he would put the ladder up against the big dead tree and climb into the branches with a bucket of glue and a paintbrush. The glue he used was something called Hugtight, and it was stickier than any glue in the world. He would paint it along the tops of all the branches and then go away. As the sun went down, birds would fly in from all around to roost for the night in the big dead tree. They didn't know, poor things, that the branches were all smeared with horrible Hugtight. The moment they landed on the branch, their feet sunk, and that was that. The next morning, which was bird pie day, Mr. Twit would climb up the ladder again and grab all the wretched birds that were stuck to the tree. It didn't matter what kind they were: song thrushes, blackbirds, sparrows, crows, little jenny wrens, robins, anything. They all went into a pot for Wednesday's bird pie supper. Next chapter, 4 sticky little boys. Sorry about that. On one Tuesday evening, after Mr. Twit had been up the ladder and smeared the tree with Hugtight, 4 little boys crept into the garden to look at the monkeys. They didn't care about the thistles and the singing nettles, not when there were monkeys to look at. After a while, they got tired of looking at the monkeys, so they explored further into the garden and found the ladder leaning against the big dead tree. They decided to climb up it just for fun. There's nothing wrong with that. The next morning, when Mr. Twit went out to collect the birds, he found 4 miserable little boys sitting in the tree, stuck as tight as they could be by the seats of their pants to the branches. There were no birds because the presence of the boys had scared them away. Mr. Twit was furious. "As there are no birds for my pie tonight," he shouted, "then it'll have to be boys instead." He started to climb the ladder. "Boy pie might be better than bird pie," he went on, grinning horribly. "More meat and not so many tiny little bones." The boys were terrified. "He's going to boil us," cried one of them. "He'll stew us alive," wailed the second one. "He'll cook us with carrots," cried the third. But the fourth little boy, who had more sense than the others, whispered, "Listen, I've had an idea. We are only stuck by the seats of our pants, so quick, unbutton your pants and slip out of them and fall to the ground." Mr. Twit had reached the top of the ladder and was just about to make a grab for the nearest boy when they all suddenly tumbled out of the tree and ran home, with their naked bottoms winking at the sun. Next chapter. The Great Upside-Down Monkey Circus. Now for the monkeys. The 4 monkeys in the cage in the garden were all one family. They were Mugglewump and his wife and their 2 small children. But what on earth were Mr. and Mrs. Twit doing with monkeys in their garden? Well, in the old days they had both worked in a circus as monkey trainers. They used to teach monkeys to do tricks and to dress up in human clothes and to smoke pipes and all the rest of that nonsense. Today, although they were retired, Mr. Twit still wanted to train monkeys. It was his dream that one day he would own the first great upside-down monkey circus in the world. That meant that the monkeys had to do everything upside down. They had to dance upside down, on their hands with their feet in the air, and they had to play football upside down. They had to balance one on top of the other upside down, with Mugglewump at the bottom and the smallest baby monkey at the very top. They even had to eat and drink upside down, and that is not an easy thing to do because the food and water has to go up your throat instead of down it. In fact, it's almost impossible, but the monkeys simply had to do it, otherwise they got nothing. All this sounds pretty silly to you and me. It sounded pretty silly to the monkeys too. They absolutely hated having to do this upside down nonsense day after day. It made them giddy standing on their heads for hours on end. Sometimes the 2 small monkey children would faint with so much blood going to their head, but Mr. Twit didn't care about that. He kept them practicing for 6 hours every day. If they didn't do as they were told, Mrs. Twit would soon come running with her beastly stick. Next chapter. The Roly-Poly Bird to the Rescue. Mugglewump and his family no longed to escape from the cage in Mrs. Twit's garden and go back to the African jungle where they came from. They hated Mr. and Mrs. Twit for making their lives so miserable. They also hated them for what they did to the birds every Tuesday and Wednesday. "Fly away, birds," they used to shout, jumping about in the cage and waving their arms. "Don't sit on that big dead tree. It's just been smeared all over with sticky glue. Go and sit somewhere else." But these were English birds, and they couldn't understand the weird African language the monkeys spoke. So they took no notice and went on using the big dead tree and getting caught for Mrs. Twit's bird pie. Then one day a truly magnificent bird flew down out of the sky and landed on the monkey cage. "Good heavens!" cried the monkeys together. "It's the Roly-Poly bird. What on earth are you doing over here in England, Roly-Poly bird?" Like the monkeys, the Roly-Poly bird came from Africa, and he spoke the same language as they did. "I've come for a holiday," said the Roly-Poly bird. "I like to travel." He fluffed his marvellous coloured feathers and looked down rather grandly at the monkeys. "For most people," he went on, "flying away on holiday is very expensive, but I can fly anywhere in the world for nothing." "Do you know how to talk to these English birds?" Mugglewump asked him. "Of course I do," said the Roly-Poly bird. "It's no good going to a country and not knowing the language." "Then we must hurry," said the Mugglewump. "Today is Tuesday, and over there you can already see the revolting Mr. Twit up the ladder painting the sticky glue on all the branches of the big dead tree. This evening, when the birds come into roost, you must warn them not to perch on that tree, or they will be made into bird pie." That evening the Roly-Poly bird flew round and round the big dead tree, singing out, "There's sticky stick stuff all over the tree. If you land in the branches, you'll never get free. So fly away, stay up high, or you'll be finished up tomorrow in a hot bird pie." And we are going to stop there, guys. So we've ended it on page 50. and we are also ending it on page. Sorry, I just said page 50. Sorry. So we're on a chapter called No Bird Pie for Mr. Twit. That's where we will be starting it off next time. But until then, guys, thank you so much for listening. And until the next time, goodbye.